Welcome, everyone, to a Friday episode of the Call Sheet Podcast here at the Fans First Sports Network. Kevin Smith with you. Fridays mean hot route conversation, where we bring a guest on to talk sports and life, often football. Today, it's a family affair today. I have my brother-in-law, Ted Hedberg, on, and we're going to talk about mental toughness throughout the sporting realm and his journey as a world-class mountain climber. Ted's got a really interesting story to tell. Welcome to the show, Ted.
Hey, Kevin. Good to talk to you.
Absolutely. So, Ted, resident of Arizona, we're going to get to that a little bit. We're doing a little cross-country conversation right now, but he's about to embark upon a fascinating journey, heading to Nepal, where he will walk out to Mount Everest. And while he's not going to climb it on this particular journey, his partner Chris is going to try to make the summit. We're going to talk about Everest, about Ted's history as a climber. But first, as we do on Hot Route Conversations, I'm going to throw Ted 3 questions that he is totally unprepared for, and we'll see how he does with this. All right, ready? I said you're a resident of Arizona. All right, if you had to leave Arizona permanently for any other U.S. state, where would you go?
Montana.
Okay, why Montana?
Next to Yellowstone, Glacier National Park. I've been to. I could just see a little cabin up there, trudging through the snow in the wintertime. It's darn cold, but I don't know. It'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. I've been to Montana. I've been to Glacier. Beautiful area. From what I hear in Montana now, the billionaires are starting to push out the millionaires. It's kind of become the wealthy and famous, so to speak. All right, here you go. Second question. Give me one athletic accomplishment you would love to be able to do. Probably not realistic, right? Maybe dunk a basketball, maybe hit a grand slam in a baseball game. Can you think of one athletic achievement you would love to be able to accomplish?
Athletic achievement? Oh my gosh. I've always been enamored in the Olympics of like the 100-meter dash.
Yeah.
I'd love to beat, the guys from Jamaica in one quick race.
Yeah. Smoke Usain Bolt in a,
Oh yeah. That would be awesome.
Now that would be a pretty cool title to be the fastest man in the world would be a pretty cool title.
Absolutely. Which is kind of the opposite of mountaineering, where you gotta go slow to succeed.
Okay. Interesting. All right, here you go. Third one. Last question. Give me a book that you've read in your life that has had a significant impact or influence on you.
Atlas Shrugged. I think Ayn Rand is probably the biggest, kind of semi-intellectual one. And I'll talk about another book later that got me into climbing. Okay.
All right, perfect. Man, you knocked those out of the park. That was easy for you. And I did not give Ted the questions ahead of time, so he's thinking on his feet. That's great. So, all right, let's get into this conversation, because again, I said I want to talk about mental toughness, and what you do, I think, is about as difficult, both physically and mentally, as can be done as an athlete. So let's start with this. How did you get into climbing? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, well, being from Arizona, I was in Boy Scouts. I did a lot of hiking. The Grand Canyon is here, the superstitions. I always loved being outdoors. So that was kind of the early, part of my life that I got into. And I wasn't, I didn't play football in high school or anything, but I goofed off a lot by going out with a backpack. I did a little rock climbing, nothing too serious though, just kind of messing around. I read a book called 7 Summits in my, I think it was my 20s or early 30s. It's by the first guy that did all 7 summits, who's just a regular guy. He's regular in the sense he was rich, but he was regular in the sense that he wasn't a professional climber, named Richard Bass. And that really influenced me. I thought, God, that might be kind of cool to do someday. Never thought about it for a while. But in my late 30s, mid 30s, I had a little life crisis in the sense, got divorced, and I thought I really need something else. And so I put $600 together. I flew all the way to Nairobi, Kenya on that 600, and hired and then took a bus to Moshi, Tanzania, where Mount Kilimanjaro is, and hired a Chaga tribesman to take me up Kilimanjaro. You're required to use a local to guide you up there. And I absolutely loved it. Kilimanjaro is not a super technical peak, but it's, a long walk. You get up to over 19,000 feet. So you feel it, and, you feel the altitude and the pain, but you also feel the success when you get to the top. So that really, I was I was sold, right there. And since then, I climbed Mount Rainier a few times, Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain outside of the Himalaya. That's in Argentina. But the real big influence, I would say, in terms of me doing a lot of international mountaineering was meeting a guy named Chris, he's a doctor from LA, and we met in Ecuador on a climb. And he was kind of like me, a little younger than me, perhaps, but we each had families. And you find out that when you're on these trips, you meet people and you probably never see them again because either they have kids or life changes or whatever. But Chris and I hung together, and we've been friends for almost 30 years now. And we've done 20 international expeditions, climbed a lot of peaks over 20,000 feet, gone through the highs and lows. And that's what got me hooked. Having a good guy to go with, a good pal. And of course, we've met lots of other people that we've tied up with since that time.
There's a lot of interesting nuggets in everything you just said, but I think the most remarkable one is that you did all of that stuff in Kilimanjaro on $600.
That's why I said $600.
Yeah.
And believe me, that would cost you $12,000 to do today.
Uh-huh.
Not only the flights have, gone crazy, probably 4,000 in flights, but you'd probably need to go with a commercial, you might go with a commercial firm. The best thing I did though, is I went to a local YMCA in Moshi, Tanzania, out of the way place, and said, hey, I want to climb it. And those guys said, okay, here's a guy whose name, you can just meet him here at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. He was a local tribesman who had probably climbed Kili 400 times. He walked in these little sandals, that looked like you could buy them at Walmart for $1.50. I walked in, of course, the super expensive stuff because I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I learned a lot on that trip.
Yeah. No doubt about it, man. That's an ambitious first big trip as well. What's it like to summit a mountain like that? You're talking, you've gone up over 20,000 feet. There's only a small handful of those mountains on the planet. What's it feel like when you get to the top? Is it exhilaration or more relief?
It's total exhilaration. Going up, it's climbing is an incremental type sport. You got to do it slowly. And the last day of a climb, you typically have your hardest day. It's a long day. You have to start at midnight, sometimes even earlier. And so you're walking in the dark, and when you finally get up and see that sunrise at the top of a peak like Kili, and you can see, that Kili is like in the middle of Africa. It's by far the highest peak. It's unbelievable. You see the safari lands with the animals and everything. It's just total euphoria and exhilaration. And of course, then you still have to get down and you're tired. But when you're on top, it's an amazing feeling.
Is getting down harder? I've read that
Yes.
It is. Yeah.
It's much harder. Your legs are wobbly. You're probably somewhat dehydrated. You're feeling the altitude because that last day you might do 4,000 or 5,000 feet of climbing, since midnight, and you're exhausted. And of course you've had that high, and you just got to get down. And it's actually a little scarier going down for me. It's always been that way. I didn't use crampons a whole lot on Kili, but walking down, it tends to be more slippery. You see what you climbed up, or you might see, because it was at night during part of that time, but you see the drop-offs. It's scary, and you just want to get down, and you normally go down about 3 times as fast as you go up, so you're moving fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about what goes into something like this, because this is not something that you just decide on a Tuesday to do. And then Thursday night, you're walking up a mountain, right? There's a tremendous amount of preparation that goes into this, both physical and mental. So what does your preparation process look like? How long do you start to ramp up before a big trip?
I think the key with me is I never get out of shape, so physically I feel like I'm always kind of ready to go. Now you have to ramp up, of course, like any sport, but I try to do 400 miles a month. So it's like 4,000 to 5,000 miles a year of work. And that would include hiking, biking, swimming, little skiing, a lot of things. And most of that's outdoors. But that makes me feel good. And that makes me feel like I'm ready to go. And as you get closer to a climb, of course, you want to do some really long days and do some altitude work. So the altitude side, getting elevation work into my workout is really important. I try to do about 20,000 feet of elevation gain per month. So most of that's hiking. Some of it's biking. I ride up to the top of South Mountain here in the Phoenix area, which is just as good. But you getting that up and down and getting used to that is super important. that's the physical side. I have some friends I keep track of on Strava. They keep track of me, and we, it's like four people. We like each other because we're trying to keep each other motivated. Uh, the other thing, the mental side is probably the most important side of climbing. I don't know if you want to get into that yet, but I mean, you want to be prepared in every sense. You got to have the right gear. Um, the thing that I've always used is a motivational tool. In Japan, they have a term called masoji. And what that is, it's a challenge that you do once a year that you have like a 50% chance of success. So with me, it might be, doing rim to rim to rim at the Grand Canyon, which is like a 50-mile jaunt in one day. That would be my masoji. I mean, I've always done it, but I mean, it's still a hard thing to do. The other rule about a masoji is you don't want to die. So you want to do things that that are really difficult at least once a year, but also, that are safe enough that you're going to make it through. So some people that might be a marathon, or a climb or swim across the English Channel, whatever. It's something that I always keep in the back of my mind. So because that mental toughness, you got to know you can do something. So when I go into a trip, you got to know that. And the other part of the mental issue with an international mountain trip or any mountain that you climb, you got to be so incredibly flexible and adaptable. There's so much that changes. I've gone on trips where I fly all the way to Nepal, and there was a climb we were going to do in Tibet, and it was canceled. So we had to do another climb in Nepal. We didn't even take the flight into China. Things change every day, that maybe the mountain's too crowded, maybe the weather's horrible. So you move and change, and other days, you get sick, and that we'll get into that as well. I mean, discomfort is part of the game.
Yeah. What happens to your body as you're fatigued and you're reaching 18, 20,000 feet, whatever it might be? What's physically going on with you? And then how do you conquer that mentally? How do you just not quit? I mean, is it such an investment that you won't let yourself quit, or is it more a pride, a desire? What is it?
Well, pride is the big thing. And I guess one thing I have learned through experience is it's not always bad to quit. If you start feeling dizzy, you get a little altitude sickness, which you always get a little of that. You get headaches. But experience tells you, that you're just going through the normal stuff because you always feel uncomfortable. When you get to 18, 20,000 feet, you're already going to be into that zone where your body is slowly deteriorating. So, for example, it's real cold and everything's dry. My fingers start to develop cuts, and cuts don't recover at that altitude. So they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and so it's hard to even get on your gloves. Your body is, you're getting skinnier, and so the key is to drink a lot of water, eat your food, because it's very hard to eat at high altitude. So you lose your appetite. As far as not quitting, I've only had that experience once where I was the only one that turned around because I was just feeling something I had never felt before. It was on a mountain called Choyu, which is an 8,000 meter climb, kind of in the Everest region, but it's in China. And I was feeling weird. I had the oxygen on. I hadn't had a lot of experience using oxygen tanks before. And I just knew that I was in trouble. And I turned back, and it was a good decision. Even though I felt bad about it, but it taught me a lesson though. I still had a great time on the trip, and I learned something. And I learned that, number one, you don't climb too fast, because I think I was doing that. I felt a little arrogant, and I was moving faster than everybody. And I think I kind of burned out.
Uh, reading some of the books I've read about Everest, people die all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think that's is it ignorance? Is it circumstance? Does it creep up on them and then all of a sudden it's too late? What are some of the reasons that that things go terribly wrong?
Well, on a climb like Everest and the highest peaks in the world, those would be above 8,000 meters, which is, roughly 27,000 feet. Falls are a big issue. You just, a slip turns into a deadly fall sometimes. And sometimes that pulls the whole rope team down with you. That's why you got to discipline yourself when you're working with a team to just watch every step. Sometimes it's fatigue and you just sit down and you refuse to move. People get heart issues. There's a lot of subjective dangers on mountains like Everest, like when you go through the ice fall on the south side. Uh, they have, it's called the ice fall, but it's like giant ice cubes. They move every day. They sometimes fall on top of entire teams, and they've had some real disasters. I think one year we lost like 18 or 19 Sherpa, where they had a collapse of an ice fall, and so a lot of it is just the nature of the game. I would say, though, you've got to expect. You sign all these waivers when you go on a trip with a guiding company, if you go with a guiding company, and that's part of the nature of the game. You got to be ready for that eventuality. I've seen dead climbers before. I've walked by tents where guys just kind of became comatose and they didn't move and they just died, at 20,000 feet. You see dead bodies occasionally. I've never been at the top of Everest, but that is just what you have to face.
What do you think about? I'm getting a little bit off track, but I'm curious as to your answer here. What do you think about guys like, there's that I think it's Aaron Ralston is his name,
Yeah.
Who cut his own arm off basically because he got himself trapped. I think he was in Canyonlands, or then you've got like the free solo guys.
Alex Honnold, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that stuff?
They are well beyond my capability, number one, especially Honnold and I look at myself as kind of the average Joe, and I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I'm not an expert in any of them. Those guys have become great at what they do because they've incrementally improved. And for them, it's not risky. For me, it would be horrible. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a tragedy if I tried to do those things. I wouldn't want a free solo, I sometimes hold on to the railing when I walk down the stairway. You just got to be, that's a whole different game. So I'm incredibly, I admire them. There's some great climbers, however, that pass away all the time because they slip. So and sometimes it's over a really simple, easy thing. Maybe they didn't clip in when they're walking across a crevasse, and next thing you know, they're gone. So that happens. But those guys, they're above me. I do admire them, though.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's talk about your upcoming trip because it's fascinating. My sister's going with you. My sister Kelly is going to go, and your partner's going to try to summit, correct?
Correct. So what's interesting about this trip is I mentioned adaptability and flexibility earlier. Here's what happened on this trip. Chris, my friend, wanted to climb Mount Everest, but he wanted to do it on the China side, which is a little more technical, but there's fewer people. So there's some advantages, but it's also, in my opinion, a little colder and probably more difficult. Well, China about 3 weeks ago banned all climbers from climbing on the China side. So that forced Chris and our guide to switch gears and move to the south side, which is in Nepal. Problem with Nepal is you go through the ice fall, which has its own dangers, but it's also much more crowded. That's where you see the pictures occasionally of, a lineup of people. And the reason you see those pictures, which are pretty rare, but there's only 3 or 4 good days to climb to the summit. And so you do get you get a lineup of people sometimes, a queue that's in very dangerous spots. But anyway, I wanted to go along the trip to be a support guy for him because I don't have the time to climb it, nor the desire, to be quite honest. I'm a little more impatient. I don't like to sit around and camp for 6 weeks waiting for good weather. So I was going to go along with him and just support him, do the walk in. Now that it's on the Nepal side, Kelly decided to go on. We decided to do a trek together before Chris and his gang arrived. We're going to do a trek in an area called the Ralaween section of Nepal, but you stay in tea houses. It's a little more cushy, bougie, which I don't mind. And then when Chris and his team show up, Kelly's leaving, and I'm going to walk in to a preparatory climb that they're going to do called Himlung. Unfortunately, I won't even have time to walk into the actual base camp of Everest. I've been there before a couple times on both sides, and so I don't necessarily need to do that, but I'll be at least there with his gang for the first 10, 15 days or so, and then I have to fly back because my son is graduating. But this is a huge deal for him. He's a little younger than me, and he's always had this as his desire. And so he's always supported me on trips, and I thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to go along, at least for the first part of it.
How long is you said, I don't have the time to wait around for 6 weeks for good weather. How long can a trip like this take?
Well, it's changed a little bit. It used to be 7, 8, 9 weeks. because you would end up doing 2 or 3 rotations on the mountain. What's happening nowadays, you can do other mountains, which we're doing, and I've done a few of those prep mountains nearby, like Lobuche and Ama de Blanc. But you have to gradually acclimatize. So base camp is at about 17,000 feet or so, but you need to get warmed up before that, so to speak. And it's shorter now. So the other big thing that's happened in climbing is people use altitude tents to get ready. So you can sleep in a tent over your bed, and it approximates sleeping at like as much as 20,000 feet or so. He told me the other day, I think he's up to like 15,000 feet. But it gradually reduces the amount of pure oxygen going into your body. And then you can even exercise on a treadmill with it, where you put a mask on. So he's going to do it in less than 4 weeks, including the preparatory climb that he's going to do called Himlung, which is a 7,000 meter peak. So that's no joke either.
I was just thinking about all this, Ted, and I'm like shaking my head. Like, there's a part of me that says, why would you do this to yourself? And there's another part of me that is so awed by it. You know, what happens when you come back? Is there a whole, like, a reacclimation process to normal life?
I think my wife Kelly would tell me I'm a little spacey, a little out of it, and a little in dream world. You're worn out. You're probably 20, 30 pounds lighter. The thing about climbing, and I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but it's a lot of discomfort, but you get used to that. So for the average person, they don't want to sleep on the ground, not to mention, walk, with 50 pounds of gear on, with crampons and an ice axe. It's discomfort. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was doing this maybe 10 years ago with a team, we were doing Ama de Blanc, but we did a preparatory climb right next to the Everest base camp called Lobuche, and it's about 20,000 feet. It's a pretty straight up and down glacier climb, but it's steep. And so you're cranking along on your crampons and using your ice socks, and you learn to work together with a team. There were 2 Norwegian women on the climb, and there usually aren't other women on the climbs. But about halfway up, at a fairly steep portion, this one woman said, "I need to take a shit." And we're all hooked together, and you can't disconnect from other people. All you can do is do it right at the spot. Well, there's about 8 or 10 feet between people. You're connected by one rope. And she moved over. I think she was in front of me. She moved over maybe 5 feet from me. Pulled, she has all this gear on, like a full Everest suit. Pulled it all down, totally exposed. Squatted and laid her load right next to us. And it was, that just shows you this is not something most people would want to do. And she was totally casual about it.
Uh-huh.
And I give her credit. I mean, she's, they're tough. People in Europe, she was from Europe. They're tough and they don't care, but for me, it was a little bit shocking, but that's the kind of thing that happens on mountains. You get diarrhea a lot, you get sick a lot, you throw up a lot, and hopefully you'll recover in a day, but sometimes it can ruin your climb.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think a little diarrhea would ruin my climb. Diarrhea ruins, like, when I'm sitting around the house, much less I'm 20,000 feet up on a mountain.
Absolutely. And in the morning, you wake up early and you have a couple cups of coffee. That's, I'm even drinking some right now. You have a couple cups of coffee and things happen, and by being at high altitude, your body moves in different ways, and your intestinal system does not wait, so
yeah.
So the whole thing about being uncomfortable is a feature of mountaineering that's different than a lot of sports. God bless these incredibly talented athletes, but they fly around in private jets, and they live a good life, and they deserve it. But I mean, I'm not sure how many of them could handle climbing a mountain.
No, well, that's why I wanted to have you on, because the more you talk, the more I just keep thinking about how tough you have to be to do what you do. Physical toughness is one thing, man. Like, I played college football. I ran down on kickoff teams where I ran 40 yards as fast as I could and smashed into other big dudes. And that is a form of toughness, but there's no way in heck that I could do any of the things that you're talking about. I mean, certainly not now. and not when I was younger. I mean, I messed around with, doing some climbs in the United States and things like that. I remember going up Gibbs Peak in Colorado, which I think is like, 13, 14,000 feet, something like that. And when we got above the tree line, I felt like my lungs were going to collapse. I'm not trained for it. And I think even if I was, or most people were, the mental aspect of it would probably just be too much of a barrier for us.
On a positive note, though, I said you were on a football team and you've been coaching for years. There's a lot of teamwork that I find exhilarating in mountain climbing. You're on a rope team with people. You got to trust these people. You're sleeping in a tent 5 feet from all the other tents, so you hear the snoring and the farting and all the other stuff that they do, and the throwing up, unfortunately, sometimes in the middle of the night. But you got to trust these people. If someone slips, you either got to catch them. If someone's having a bad day, you got to pump them up, because everybody has a bad day. That's just the nature of the beast. So that's the part of teamwork that I didn't get maybe in the same way you did when you were on a football team, which I think is the ultimate team sport. But mountaineering does involve a lot of teamwork. Not many people free solo. You're usually with a guide and some people that are equally or more talented than you are. So the teamwork thing is really cool. You meet some people from all over the world. From New Zealand, from Australia, all over Europe, from India, Nepal. The Sherpas are fantastic people. You learn to drink Sherpa tea, which kind of made me sick when the first time I tried it. So there's a lot of things you learn and that are really exciting about adventure travel and mountaineering.
Ted, fantastic stuff, man. I really appreciate the conversation. If you're listening and you didn't learn something, then you're not paying attention. This was great. And as far again as the mental toughness of an athlete is concerned, last question, real quick. Is it fair to say that the mental part of it is as tough, if not tougher, than the physical part?
I think it's more tough, because you're away from your family, you're away from your work, you're away from your friends for the most part, and it's hard to sit in a tent. On Mount Denali in Alaska, we had days where we had 4 or 5 days in a row where I couldn't leave the tent. So that means you're doing a lot of things in that tent to survive during the day, eating, melting ice and snow. And the mental part of it is you can't go anywhere. You could run away, but you're not going to get very far. But it's just waiting things out is difficult sometimes in life. And that's the hardest part for me, to be honest. You can stay in shape and do okay. But it's tough. The mental part, I think, is well over half of it.
Fascinating stuff. Well, best of luck to you and Kelly. Obviously that's not your typical married couple road trip.
No, I'm a little worried about that. But I promised her that it will not be as difficult as I describe on my other trips. Like I say, we'll be staying in tea houses. She's not gonna carry a big pack. I promised to slow down for her. There's a lot of promises I've had to make, so it's going to be tough to keep these commitments.
Yeah.
I think she'd probably like to talk to you about it afterwards, and it'd be interesting to get her impressions.
Yeah, well, you know what? When you guys come back, we'll have the two of you on together, and that'll be a fascinating follow-up.
Great. I better be like at my office and her at home, so she doesn't, I don't get that angry glare. But I'm
get
sure
a little
she'll
separation.
Have a great time.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. All right, Ted Hedberg, my brother-in-law and a world-class mountain climber. And, if you're thinking he's crazy, he might be a little bit crazy, but that's okay in the best of ways. So that is our Friday Hot Route conversation here at the Call Sheet. Join us on Monday morning GM, where we weigh in on a lot of the off-season activity in the NFL. Until then, hope everybody has a great weekend.